3 black SUVs rolled silently into Maple Street at exactly 2:17 in the morning. Their headlights sliced through the thick fog as they crept toward a quiet white house at the end of the street. Rain had just begun to fall, turning the empty road into a mirror of shimmering reflections. The neighborhood was asleep. Porch lights glowed softly. Dogs didn't bark. Not even the wind seemed willing to make a sound. One by one, 12 men stepped out of the SUVs. They wore black tactical clothing with no logos, no names, and no identifying marks. Every movement was precise. Every glance was calculated. The team leader looked at the photograph in his hand. An elderly man, gray cardigan, gentle smile. The kind of neighbor who baked cookies at Christmas and watered roses every morning. He lowered the photo. Target confirmed. A calm voice crackled through his earpiece. Proceed. The men spread across the property with practiced efficiency. 2 climbed the backyard fence. 4 surrounded the porch. The others secured the street. From a bedroom window across the road, 12-year-old Ethan Parker watched with wide eyes. His breathing became shallow. He recognized the house immediately. It belonged to Mr. Vincent Romano, the quiet old widower everyone on Maple Street adored. None of it made sense. Why would 12 armed men come for an old gardener? The team leader raised his hand. 3 fingers. 2. 1. Just as the first man reached the front door, every light on Maple Street went out. The neighborhood disappeared into complete darkness. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. No shouting, no footsteps, no gunfire, only silence. Then the lights returned. The SUVs were still there, their engines still running, their doors still open. But the 12 men had vanished. Their radios lay on the wet pavement. Their flashlights flickered weakly. One jacket rested beside the curb, yet not a single person remained. Ethan stared in disbelief. His hands trembled against the windowsill. Across the street, Vincent Romano slowly opened his front door, still wearing his gray cardigan, still holding the same metal watering can. He glanced once at the abandoned vehicles before calmly walking to his rose garden. As rain fell around him, he gently watered the flowers as though nothing unusual had happened. Minutes later, police sirens echoed through the night. By sunrise, the disappearance would become the biggest mystery in the city's history. But the detectives were asking the wrong question. They were trying to discover where the 12 men had gone. The real question was far more dangerous. Who was the quiet old man living at the end of Maple Street? Because nobody knew. The world's most feared mafia boss had been living right next door. By sunrise, Maple Street was crawling with police officers. Yellow tape stretched across the road while detectives photographed 3 abandoned black SUVs. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters spoke excitedly into cameras, calling it the strangest disappearance the city had ever seen. Yet standing quietly among the curious neighbors was the man at the center of it all, Vincent Romano. Gray cardigan, brown trousers, a small watering can still resting beside his rose garden. He looked no different from any other retired man enjoying a peaceful morning. Detective Daniel Harper approached him with a notebook. "Mr. Romano, did you hear anything during the night?" Vincent smiled politely. "Only the rain. Did you recognize any of the vehicles?" "I'm afraid not." Harper glanced toward the garden. "You seem surprisingly calm." Vincent looked at his white roses before answering. "When you've lived a long life, detective, you learn that panic rarely solves anything." The detective scribbled a few notes before moving to the next house. To him, Vincent Romano was simply another witness, nothing more. Across the street, 12-year-old Ethan Parker couldn't stop staring. He had watched the entire event from his bedroom window. The SUVs, the armed men, the darkness, their impossible disappearance. And through it all, Mr. Romano had never seemed frightened. That bothered Ethan more than anything. Unlike most boys his age, Ethan loved solving mysteries. His bedroom shelves were filled with detective novels, true crime magazines, and books about famous investigations. He noticed details adults often ignored. That afternoon, he pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote 3 words across the first page: D.H. Romano Fire. Underneath, he listed everything he knew. Lives alone, no family visits, always polite, never leaves town. 12 armed men came for him. He stared at the final note for several seconds. Nothing about Vincent Romano made sense. For the rest of the week, Ethan quietly observed his neighbor. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, Vincent stepped outside carrying the same silver watering can. He watered every rose in the same order: white, red, yellow. Then he fed 5 stray cats that appeared as if they knew the exact schedule. After that, he collected his newspaper, waved to passing neighbors, and walked around Maple Street for precisely 23 minutes. Not 22, not 24, exactly 23. His routine never changed. Rain, sunshine, weekdays, weekends. It was almost too perfect. On Saturday morning, Ethan finally spoke to him. "Good morning, Mr. Romano." Vincent smiled warmly. "Morning, Ethan. You always wake up early. So do curious people." The answer caught Ethan off guard. Before he could reply, Vincent picked a white rose from the garden. "For your mother." She said white roses remind her of her grandmother. Ethan froze. His mother had mentioned that only once, months earlier. How could Vincent possibly remember? "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Vincent nodded. The smallest conversations are often the easiest to forget. Then he added with a smile, "Unless you're paying attention." That evening, Ethan began watching the house from his bedroom window. At first, nothing happened. Then, just after midnight, a black luxury sedan entered Maple Street. Unlike the police vehicles from earlier in the week, this car moved slowly and quietly. It stopped outside Vincent's house. A sharply dressed man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He looked around carefully before walking toward the front door. Something unexpected happened. The door opened before he could knock. Vincent was already waiting. The visitor lowered his head respectfully. "Good evening, sir," Vincent smiled. "You're right on time." The 2 men disappeared inside. Exactly 19 minutes later, the visitor walked back to his car. His briefcase was gone. Before leaving, he looked toward Vincent and gave a slight nod of respect. Then he drove away into the night. Ethan's heart raced. Who was this man? Why had he called Vincent sir? And what had he left inside that house? He quickly grabbed his notebook and wrote one final line beneath the others. Midnight visitor. Expensive car. Left without his briefcase. Closing the notebook, Ethan looked back toward Vincent's quiet house. The porch light switched off. The curtains closed. The street fell silent once again. For everyone else on Maple Street, it was just another peaceful night. For Ethan, the investigation had only just begun. Ethan barely slept. The image of the black sedan stayed in his mind all night. Whoever the visitor was, he hadn't treated Vincent like an ordinary retired man. He had treated him like someone far more important. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He was going to find out who kept visiting Mr. Romano. 3 nights later, another luxury vehicle arrived. This time it was a dark blue SUV. Instead of parking directly outside Vincent's house, it stopped halfway down the street. A woman in an elegant business suit stepped out. She looked confident until she reached Vincent's gate. Her shoulders straightened. She took a deep breath. Then she walked to the front door. Before she could knock, the door opened. Vincent smiled as though he'd been expecting her. "Good evening." "It's good to see you again," she replied. They disappeared inside. Exactly 24 minutes later, she walked back to her SUV. When she arrived, she looked worried. When she left, she was smiling. That pattern continued for weeks. Every few days, someone important visited Vincent. A businessman, a retired judge, a shipping executive, a doctor, even a man Ethan recognized from television. No 2 visitors looked alike, yet they all behaved the same way. They arrived with serious expressions. They left looking relieved, and every one of them addressed Vincent with quiet respect. Ethan filled page after page in his notebook. Visitor number 3, black SUV. Businesswoman. Stayed 24 minutes, smiling when she left. Visitor number 4, silver sedan. Older man. Military posture. Stayed 17 minutes. Shook Vincent's hand before leaving. Visitor number 5, luxury coupe. Expensive watch. Called Vincent sir. Stayed 21 minutes. The notebook was becoming less like a school project and more like an investigation. One afternoon, Ethan decided to follow one of the visitors. He climbed onto his bicycle and stayed several blocks behind a silver Mercedes that had just left Vincent's house. The car drove downtown before stopping outside one of the tallest office buildings in the city. Employees rushed to open the doors. Security guards greeted the driver immediately. Whoever the man was, he clearly held an important position. Ethan looked up at the building. The company name covered the entire entrance. It was one of the largest shipping corporations in the country. His heart raced. Why would the CEO visit a retired gardener? That evening, Ethan searched the company online. The executive had been interviewed by national news channels. He managed billions of dollars in international trade. People described him as one of the country's most influential businessmen. Yet somehow, he still made time to visit Vincent Romano. Something wasn't adding up. Days later, Ethan noticed something else. Every Thursday afternoon, the same black sedan drove slowly past Vincent's house. It never stopped. It never honked. It simply passed by once before disappearing. The driver never looked at the house, but Vincent always glanced toward the street at the exact moment the car passed, almost as though both men were silently confirming something. No words, no gestures, just perfect timing. Late one evening, Ethan spotted a delivery driver placing a plain white envelope into Vincent's mailbox. There were no stamps, no address, only a black wax seal. Curiosity got the better of him. As Vincent carried the envelope toward the house, a gust of wind almost pulled it from his hand. For just a second, Ethan saw the seal clearly, a black raven, standing on top of a crown. He had never seen that symbol before. The moment Vincent stepped inside, Ethan rushed home and searched the internet. He typed every description he could think of. Black raven, crown, family crest, secret society, shipping company logo. Nothing. It was as if the symbol didn't exist. He closed his laptop in frustration. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase it. Across the city, in a luxurious office overlooking the harbor, another man stared at the exact same raven symbol. Marco DeLuca. Young. Ambitious. Feared by everyone who worked for him. He slowly closed an old leather folder and looked at the photograph inside. The photograph showed a younger Vincent Romano standing beside a cargo ship. Marco whispered only 4 words. "So, you're still alive." His closest advisor frowned. "You know this man?" Marco didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out across the city lights. "My father once told me there was only one man he would never betray." He placed Vincent's photograph on the desk. He called him the ghost. Silence filled the room, because everyone there knew the legend. No one believed it was real. Until now. Marco DeLuca closed the office blinds. The city skyline disappeared behind dark glass, leaving only the soft glow of the desk lamp. He opened an old leather folder. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, shipping manifests, and grainy photographs collected over 30 years. Every document pointed to one name, Vincent Romano. Yet none of them proved anything. Marco picked up the oldest photograph. A cargo ship. 5 men. One stood slightly apart from the others. Young. Confident, watching the camera instead of smiling. Vincent. "My father kept this picture hidden," Marco said quietly. "He called this man the ghost." His advisor frowned. "I thought that was just an old underworld story." "So did I." Marco slid another document across the table. It contained reports from different decades. Whenever rival organizations suddenly stopped fighting, Vincent's name appeared nearby. Whenever business disputes ended peacefully, someone mentioned a quiet negotiator. Whenever powerful people avoided disaster, a mysterious advisor had appeared just long enough to solve the problem. Different names, different cities, the same face. Marco poured himself a glass of whiskey. "My father once told me something I'll never forget." The room fell silent. He said there are men who build empires, and then there are men who build the rules every empire must follow. He looked toward Vincent's photograph. The ghost never wanted to own the world. He wanted the world to need him. Across Maple Street, Vincent was trimming his rose bushes. Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch. "Your roses look beautiful this year," Vincent smiled. "They bloom best when nobody rushes them." She laughed. "You always have an answer." "I've had a long time to think." To Mrs. Henderson, it sounded like ordinary conversation. To Vincent, it meant something entirely different. From his bedroom window, Ethan continued watching. Something new caught his attention. During Vincent's morning walk, the same people always appeared. A jogger, a mail carrier, a woman walking her dog, a man reading a newspaper on the same bench. Different clothes every day, same faces, too consistent to be coincidence. Ethan opened his notebook. Possibly watching Vincent? Or protecting him? That afternoon, Ethan visited the public library. He searched old newspapers for Vincent Romano. At first, he found nothing. Then a faded article from 28 years earlier appeared on the screen. Locale businessman helps and port strike. The accompanying photograph made Ethan stop breathing. It was Vincent. Younger, but unmistakably the same man. Another article showed Vincent attending an international trade conference. Another described him donating millions anonymously after a flood. Another placed him beside government officials during an economic crisis. Different years, different careers, yet he barely seemed to age. Ethan copied every article he could find. As he packed his bag, an elderly librarian noticed the photographs. Interesting choice. You know him? Ethan asked. She studied one of the pictures. I don't know his name, but I remember people waiting hours just to meet him. What did he do? She smiled. Nobody ever seemed to agree. Some called him a businessman. Others said he was a diplomat. A few believed he was something much bigger. Before Ethan could ask another question, she quietly added, whatever the truth was. It made powerful people nervous. That evening, Marco received an encrypted message. One sentence appeared on the screen. Observation team failed. No explanation. No details. Just those 3 words. He already knew what it meant. The 12 men sent to Maple Street were gone forever. Marco slowly deleted the message, then looked once more at Vincent's photograph. So the stories were true. He wasn't chasing an old man. He was challenging a legend. Meanwhile, Vincent sat alone on his porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. A black raven landed on the white fence surrounding his garden. The old man smiled. It's been a long time, old friend. The bird remained perfectly still. Moments later, it flew into the evening sky. Vincent watched until it disappeared. Then his smile faded. They finally remembered me. Inside the house, an old telephone rang. Vincent answered. He listened without speaking. After nearly a minute, he quietly replied, I understand. He placed the receiver down and looked toward Ethan's house. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the darkness. Vincent gave a small, knowing smile, almost as if he understood exactly what Ethan had discovered. Then he switched off the porch light. Across the city, Marco DeLuca assembled his closest advisors. The observation is over, he said. This time, I'm going to pay Mr. Romano a personal visit. No one in the room spoke, because everyone understood one thing. If Marco was walking into the ghost's world, he might never walk back out. The rain returned just after sunset. By midnight, Maple Street had become a quiet river of reflections beneath glowing streetlights. Inside his house, Vincent Romano sat in his favorite armchair beside the fireplace. An old jazz record played softly. A cup of tea rested untouched on the table. He looked like a man enjoying an ordinary evening, but his eyes kept drifting toward the front window. He was waiting. Across the city, Marco DeLuca's black sedan crossed the bridge toward Maple Street. This time, he came alone. No convoy, no armed escort, just a driver. Marco wasn't interested in another failed operation. He wanted answers. As the sedan entered the neighborhood, he noticed something unusual. There were no security cameras, no guards, no fences. Nothing suggested the home belonged to a legendary crime boss. It looked normal. Too normal. The driver stopped outside Vincent's house. Marco stepped into the rain. For a moment, he simply stared at the quiet porch. Then the front door opened. Vincent Romano stood there holding an umbrella. You've come a long way, he said. Marco smiled. I believe we've been trying to meet for years. I suppose we have. Vincent stepped aside. Come in. The house was warm and surprisingly simple. Old books lined the shelves. A chessboard rested on a wooden table. The smell of fresh tea filled the room. Marco looked around. I expected something different, Vincent chuckled. Everyone does. They sat across from one another. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Marco broke the silence. Are you the ghost? Vincent poured tea into 2 cups. People have called me many things. That wasn't my question. Vincent slid 1 cup across the table. Sometimes the wrong answer is safer than the right one. Marco didn't touch the tea. My father worked for you. Vincent's expression softened. I remember him. He said you disappeared. I retired. Marco laughed quietly. No one retires from a life like yours. Vincent met his eyes. The wise ones do. Outside, Ethan watched everything from his bedroom window. His heart pounded. Marco's car, the open door, the 2 men talking inside. He couldn't hear a single word, but he knew this meeting would change everything. He reached for his notebook, then stopped. For the first time, writing things down no longer felt enough. He needed to know what they were saying. Inside, Marco finally picked up the teacup. Tell me something. Why hide here? Vincent smiled. Because nobody notices ordinary people. He pointed toward the window. The richest man in the city lives behind 10-foot walls. The mayor travels with bodyguards. People expect powerful men to be surrounded by attention. He leaned forward. So they never think to look at the old man watering roses. Marco couldn't argue. It was brilliant. Vincent stood and walked toward the fireplace. My greatest achievement wasn't building an empire. It was convincing the world I no longer had one. Marco watched silently. Do you still control it? Vincent smiled without answering. Instead, he placed another log on the fire. The flames grew brighter. You came looking for a king, but kings eventually grow old. Marco frowned. Then who rules now? Vincent looked into the fire. The people who learned the right lessons. A phone rang somewhere inside the house. Vincent ignored it. Seconds later, it stopped. Marco noticed. You aren't going to answer? I already know who it is. And? They're calling to tell me your companies have started losing investors. Marco's expression changed. How could you possibly know that? Vincent looked almost amused. Because people always panic before they verify bad news. Marco reached for his phone. 3 missed calls, 7 urgent messages. His face went pale. Every message carried the same theme. Contracts canceled. Partners withdrawing. Accounts under review. His empire was beginning to crack, and Vincent hadn't left his chair. Marco slowly stood. You planned this, Vincent shook his head. No, I simply knew which direction the wind was blowing. As Marco walked toward the door, Vincent spoke one final sentence. Your father once understood something you never did. Marco stopped. Loyalty is earned over decades. It cannot be bought overnight. The room fell silent. Marco walked into the rain without another word. From across the street, Ethan watched the black sedan disappear into the darkness. He had no idea what had been said inside that house. But one thing was certain. Marco DeLuca had arrived believing he was hunting a legend. He left knowing the legend had been waiting for him all along. Marco didn't drive back to his office. Instead, he told his driver to head for an old warehouse near the harbor. Few people knew the building existed. Fewer still knew what it contained. Deep beneath the warehouse was a steel vault. Inside were hundreds of files collected by Marco's father over 4 decades. Every document related to one man, Vincent Romano. Marco unlocked the vault himself. Dust filled the air as he pulled out a thick black folder marked only with a silver raven. Inside were photographs, coded letters, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. One page immediately caught his attention. Rule un. Never mistake silence for weakness. Marco frowned. His father had underlined the sentence 3 times. Across town, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the meeting he had witnessed. The next morning, he skipped his usual bike ride and went straight to the city library. Mrs. Brooks, the elderly librarian, smiled as he entered. Back again? I need everything you have on Vincent Romano. She hesitated. That name hasn't been requested in years. She disappeared into the archives and returned with a small cardboard box. Inside were newspapers dating back more than 30 years. Ethan carefully turned each brittle page. Most articles barely mentioned Vincent, yet his photograph kept appearing. A charity fundraiser, a shipping conference, a business award, a disaster relief project. Different places, different decades. The same calm smile, the same steady eyes. It was as if he had quietly stood beside every important event without anyone asking why. Near the bottom of the box, Ethan found a faded envelope. There was no address, only a black wax seal, a raven standing on a crown. His heart skipped. It was the same symbol he had seen on the mysterious envelope delivered to Vincent's house. Inside was a single photograph. 5 men stood on the deck of an old cargo ship. 4 faced the camera. 1 looked toward the horizon. Vincent. Written on the back were 7 words. The raven never abandons its own. Mrs. Brooks looked at the photograph and sighed. I hoped I'd never see this again. You know what it means? Ethan asked. I know enough to stay away from it. She pointed toward the raven seal. Years ago, detectives came here asking about that symbol. What happened? They stopped asking. Why? No one ever told me. She lowered her voice. But one detective said something before he left. What? He said, if you ever see that raven again, forget you saw it. Marco continued reading his father's files. Most pages contained names, business leaders, judges, police commissioners, port directors. Beside many names was only one word, trusted. Others carried a different note, never again. Marco slowly understood. His father hadn't admired Vincent because he was feared. He admired him because people trusted his word more than signed contracts. That kind of influence couldn't be stolen. It had to be earned. Late that afternoon, Ethan rode past Vincent's house. The old man was feeding stray cats as usual. Nothing about him suggested he was carrying decades of secrets. Vincent looked up and smiled. The library was helpful? Ethan nearly dropped his bicycle. How? Did you know where I'd been? Vincent scattered another handful of food onto the grass. Curious people usually begin with books. He stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. And sometimes they discover more than they expected. Ethan gathered the courage to ask, were you really called the ghost? For the first time since they had met, Vincent didn't smile. Instead, he looked toward the setting sun. There was once a man who answered to that name. And was it you? Vincent remained silent. After several moments, he quietly replied, names matter far less than choices. He turned and walked back toward the house. Before closing the door, he spoke without looking back. If you're looking for monsters, Ethan, be careful. Sometimes they're the ones wearing the nicest suits. The door closed. Ethan stood frozen. He still didn't have a direct answer, yet somehow he knew more than ever before. Across the city, Marco reached the final page of his father's file. Folded inside was a handwritten letter. It contained only one sentence. If you ever find Vincent Romano, don't challenge him. Ask him to teach you. Marco slowly folded the letter, then looked out toward the city skyline. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure whether Vincent Romano was his greatest enemy or the only man capable of saving everything he had built. The following evening, Ethan found Vincent sitting alone on his porch. The old chessboard rested between 2 empty chairs. Without looking up, Vincent said quietly, I was wondering how long it would take. Ethan hesitated. You knew I'd come back. Vincent smiled. Curiosity always comes back. He pointed to the empty chair. Sit. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Vincent arranged the chess pieces with slow, steady hands. Then he pushed the white pieces toward Ethan. You make the first move. Ethan moved a pawn. Vincent nodded. Most people think the king is the most important piece. He picked up another pawn. But history is usually changed by the people nobody notices. He placed the pawn back on the board, the quiet ones. Ethan finally asked the question that had haunted him for weeks. Were you really the ghost? Vincent looked out toward the rose garden. I was a man who solved problems. For good people? For anyone willing to keep their word. He looked back at Ethan. The world already has enough men who break promises. Why disappear? Ethan asked. You had everything. Vincent laughed softly. I had influence. That's different. He leaned back in his chair. Power attracts enemies. Influence creates friends. I learned long ago that friends outlive empires. Inside the house, the telephone rang. Vincent ignored it. A minute later, it rang again. Still, he didn't move. Aren't you going to answer? Ethan asked. Vincent smiled. If it's important, they'll solve it themselves. The phone stopped ringing. Across the city, Marco sat alone in his office. The handwritten letter from his father remained open on the desk. Don't challenge him. Ask him to teach you. For the first time in years, Marco canceled every meeting on his schedule. Instead of giving orders, he began reading every file his father had left behind. Page after page told the same story. Vincent had never demanded loyalty. He earned it. He remembered birthdays. He helped families. He kept every promise he made. People didn't follow him because they were afraid. They followed him because they trusted him. Marco slowly realized the truth. His empire had been built on fear. Vincent's had been built on respect. Back on Maple Street, the chess game continued. Vincent deliberately sacrificed one of his strongest pieces. Ethan frowned. You could have kept that. I know. Then why didn't you? Vincent smiled. Because sometimes losing a piece wins the game. Ethan stared at the board. Several moves later, he understood. The sacrifice had opened a path to victory. Vincent quietly said, the best leaders don't protect everything. They protect what matters. The evening breeze carried the scent of roses across the porch. Vincent stood and walked into the garden. He carefully trimmed a single white rose before handing it to Ethan. My mother loves these, Ethan said. I remember. You remember everything. Vincent looked toward the fading sunset. No, I remember people. There's a difference. Ethan looked at the old man differently now. Not as a mystery, not as a criminal, but as someone carrying the weight of a lifetime of impossible choices. Do you regret any of it? Vincent was silent for a long time. Finally, he answered, I regret the people I couldn't help. Nothing more, nothing less. As darkness settled over Maple Street, Vincent walked Ethan to the front gate. I have one last favor to ask, anything. When people tell my story, Vincent smiled gently. Tell them I was simply a neighbor. Ethan frowned. But that's not the truth. Vincent looked back at the little white house. It became the truth. He extended his hand. Ethan shook it. The old man's grip was firm, steady, certain. For the first time, Vincent said, I think you'll make a fine storyteller. Ethan smiled. I'll never forget you. Vincent looked toward the stars. I hope you do. Confused, Ethan asked why. Because legends become dangerous the longer people remember them. He closed the gate softly. Good night, Ethan. As Ethan walked home, he turned around one last time. Vincent was still standing beside the roses, watching the night sky. It was the last time Ethan would ever see him there. The following morning, the house at the end of Maple Street would be empty, and the legend of the ghost would disappear once again. The next morning, Maple Street felt different. At exactly 6 o'clock, Mrs. Henderson opened her curtains, expecting to see Vincent Romano watering his roses. The garden was empty. She frowned. For 15 years, Vincent had never missed a morning. Not once. Across the street, Ethan was already outside. He walked to Vincent's front gate and noticed something strange. The mailbox was gone. The porch furniture had disappeared. Even the flower pots had been removed. His heart began to race. He knocked on the front door. No answer. Carefully, he turned the handle. The door swung open. The house was empty. Not abandoned. Not disturbed. Simply empty. Every room had been cleaned. The bookshelves were bare. The fireplace was cold. The chessboard was gone. Only one thing remained. A single white rose rested on the wooden table. Beside it lay a folded envelope with Ethan's name written neatly across the front. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then you've learned the most important lesson. The strongest people are rarely the loudest. The wisest leaders are rarely the most famous. And the greatest influence is often invisible. Take care of your family. Keep your word. And never underestimate an ordinary neighbor. Vincent. Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his notebook. He knew he would never throw it away. News of Vincent's disappearance spread quickly. Detective Harper searched every database. There were no travel records, no recent bank activity, no forwarding address. Even the deed to the house had been transferred months earlier through a private trust. It was as though Vincent Romano had quietly planned his disappearance long before anyone suspected who he really was. Harper eventually closed the file. Officially, Vincent Romano was listed as a missing person. Unofficially, no one believed he wanted to be found. Across the city, Marco DeLuca stood alone in his office. He looked at the white chess pawn Vincent had left behind. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he picked up the phone. Cancel every meeting. His assistant sounded confused. For how long? Marco looked out over the harbor. For as long as it takes. That afternoon, he visited the families of people who had worked for his father. He apologized where apologies were overdue. He honored old promises. He quietly walked away from deals built on fear. For the first time in his life, he began earning respect instead of demanding it. Vincent had never given him orders, only an example. Years passed. Ethan became an investigative journalist. He exposed corruption, solved forgotten cases, and earned a reputation for uncovering stories hidden in plain sight. Yet one mystery remained unsolved. Every year, on the anniversary of Vincent's disappearance, Ethan visited the little white house at the end of Maple Street. The neighborhood had changed. New families had moved in. Children played where black SUVs had once stood. No one remembered the old man who grew roses, except Ethan. One autumn afternoon, while covering a conference in another state, Ethan took a walk through a quiet neighborhood. Halfway down the street, he stopped. An elderly man wearing a gray cardigan was watering white roses outside a modest house. Several stray cats gathered around his feet. The man looked up. Their eyes met. A familiar smile crossed his face. Not a greeting. Not a farewell. Simply recognition. A delivery truck passed between them. When it moved on, the old man was gone. Only the gently swaying roses remained. Ethan smiled to himself. He didn't search the neighborhood. He didn't ask questions. Some mysteries, he realized, deserved to remain mysteries. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded letter Vincent had written years before. Then he quietly walked away, because he finally understood the lesson that had taken him a lifetime to learn. The world's most powerful people don't always seek attention. Sometimes, they live in the smallest house on the quietest street. They smile at their neighbors. They keep their promises. And when the time is right, they disappear without leaving a trace.